So my name is Joseph Harrington and I am an independent filmmaker. The film that I have been working on that is coming towards completion was inspired by a drone operator that I work with who we were having a pub. We were at the pub one day and we were having a drink and he told me that his mother-in-law's home was being demolished. And I was a bit confused. Oh, what do you mean? And he basically said that the reason it's being demolished is that it's going to fall off a cliff on the Norfolk coast, and that the erosion was so bad that the councillor basically struck it as unsafe. And I was not familiar with coastal erosion on the coast or the location that the film set in Happisburgh, and so that was the initial inspiration. I think it was just this kind of disbelief that homes are lost over the coast, and that actually there's no support from the government, and that if you live on the coast and you bought a house 20 years ago, that actually you might be at really high risk of losing it and losing your investment, losing the memories of that home, and also not really having any other options. One of the key injustices of the film actually is that sense that some people's homes are protected and others aren't, and also there is this sense that, for people, for the residents of Happisburgh, they used to have sea defences up until the 90s, and the policy changed. So I think there's a big question around, well, if you were someone that bought a home in that area, and it wasn't high risk, and then you find that you can't insure your home, and that the sea defences are being taken out, actually, is that fair? And I think and then when you compare it to other settlements that have really hard defences that are maintained and that are being maintained right now, I think you do have a big social justice question of, why are some people's homes more important than others? So for people that live in Happisburgh, the erosion has been really significant, and actually the amount of homes lost has been quite a bit. So since 1996, it's been about 36 homes have been lost. Now, if you put that in perspective, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's roughly one home a year, a little bit more. And actually those numbers are going to rapidly increase. And I think that's the thing that the film is really trying to point out, is that, you might have a news story in the local press every now and then of another home's been lost, and that's really sad and that's really visceral. But actually suddenly it will get to a point where it's 10 homes a year, 50 homes a year. And as these numbers escalate, you think more about how vulnerable you are. If you live near a river, if you live in a community that's downstream from a coastal settlement, you're on lower ground. So I think there's lots of places where I think people are going to start realising more that actually climate change isn't just 1.5 Celsius, it's not just food shortages. It could also actually be, well, actually, is my home still going to be here? And I think that's really important to help people come to understand that. And then you have to think about the larger question of, well, actually, how viable is Norfolk as a county and then East Anglia? Because all these rivers are connected, so what's the future of London look like? So I think that's kind of what the film does, is it looks at what is kind of an issue that's very visceral and sad, but actually in 50 years' time, what's the reality for people that live in the UK? One of the things I learned making the film was that by doing a film over 2 years, I've developed a really strong relationship with the characters in the film. And I think really that's been my biggest learning curve is actually how tight and trusting that relationship can be with the people in the film, and actually how much more you get out of them as characters and how much more they're willing to share with you. So I think, although I probably wouldn't make a film in this way again anytime soon, I think my biggest learning curve was probably just how much you can get out of people by actually building such a strong relationship with them. I think making films as a self-shooter and kind of being a one-man band can kind of have quite a bad rep in the industry, and it can kind of be associated with kind of amateur filmmaking. I think some of that is true, but also there's an element where actually by being a really small crew, you have that intensity with the people you're filming. And, I think if we had a sound man there, if we had a camera operator, if I was kind of in another room with a director's monitor, it would be a very different film. And I think there's some sequences that are filmed a specific way because that's the only way we could have filmed it. It was just me and maybe a mate here or there. And actually, those are some of the strongest scenes in the film, I think. The most memorable behind-the-scenes moment was actually when I walked in on a character, this brilliant lady called Bryony in the film. And she's just a great character. She's funny, she's witty, she has a way with words. She has an absolute bonkers kind of inspiring way about her. And this dedication that she has. I mean, I walked in on her, a retiree who's close to 80, building a conservatory on her own in her garden, which is just like, you know, if you went round your grandma's house, you're like, what are you doing? So, but actually, it's one of the funniest scenes in the film. And so I think from a behind-the-scenes perspective, that's the best, is walking on this lady building a conservatory on her own, bits are falling down, you know, it's really quite a dangerous work site. And you think, what are you doing? Your house is going to fall off a cliff in 4 years. But she wanted to do it for her cats.
Oh, that's a good reason.
Yeah. So my favourite scene in the film, I think, is probably my favourite behind-the-scenes moment, which is Bryony building a conservatory in her garden on her own. Because I think there's a lot that you get from it as a viewer. So it's, who is this lady? Why is she building a conservatory on her own? I think it says so much about her character. And I think those are kind of, this is why I love documentary so much, is because you can't plan that. Yeah, you're not going to script 77-year-old woman builds conservatory in her house that's about to fall off the sea, because no one would believe you, because it just sounds ridiculous. But that's the great thing about documentaries, that actually happened, and so I can film it. And the conservatory's there, she finished it, you know, which I think is a testament to her kind of foolhardiness and, you know, her refusal basically to back down and to take advice from anyone. So making a film that essentially has no budget, over a 2-year period, or more than that now. So we started it in November 2021. I think the biggest thing that I learned was just kind of seeing something through. I think I had this feeling when, after I got through the first few months of the project, that actually I realised this was going to be a lot bigger than I originally wanted it to be or thought it would be. And as the project got bigger, I realised actually I was taking on a larger workload. So I think the thing that I learned is actually just seeing the project through to the end. And it's really hard to do. I mean, there were many times where I really questioned whether or not I was actually ever going to finish this film, or whether it would get to a point where it was screened. And I just felt really guilty about that. You know, I would have those thoughts and I think, oh no, I need to see it through, because, you know, we've got cast members that are relying on me, contributors that have shared their story with me. And it's a great story. I mean, you know, I wanted it to be finished, but I think the reality of making a 2-hour film, making a 1-hour film over 2 years kind of was dawning on me more and more. And actually, this last little push that we've done has probably been the most intense period on the project. But I think now I can say, well, I did it. You know, and although it has been really challenging at times and there's been a lot of self-doubt, you know, we can now say, well, actually, there's a film there and the contributors can be proud of it and I can be proud of it. I guess the purpose of the film is to help people understand coastal erosion a little bit better, which I think is important because I didn't really know what it was, and I didn't realise that there were homes on the Norfolk coast that regularly get demolished because they're too close to the cliffs. And I think it's not so much about spreading awareness as much as about it's making people realise that actually this is an issue that is going to get significantly worse as sea levels rise, and actually to the point where, you know, certain counties aren't really going to be viable. So places like Norfolk, the Norfolk Broads, you know, if they're breached by the sea, then we'll lose a lot of homes and a lot of communities. So I think it's about making people realise how much with climate change the place we live in is moving, it is shifting, and actually we're quite vulnerable to that change, being where we live in the world. So I guess the intended impact is that it's getting ahead of that narrative and making people realise just how significant the change to our area in the world will be. My favourite part of filmmaking would probably be the relationships with contributors. I get a lot of fun out of kind of getting to know someone and kind of breaking down their barriers and getting to a point where actually, you know, before you know it, they're kind of crying in an interview. And I think that's really rewarding, to build a trust with someone, then get them to that point where they can be that vulnerable with you. But I enjoy lots of things. I enjoy filming, I enjoy editing. But I think, you know, the thing that I think, you know, I look at the film, I go, what's my favourite part? It's not the way I filmed something or the way I edited something. It's a moment when, like, I don't know, there's one character who's a bit grumpy, and at the end of the film he's crying. And I think to get him from that point where he's kind of arms folded, doesn't want to share, and then by the end of the film he's kind of like gushing out to the audience, I think that's really rewarding. And I think that is a great testament to kind of the process and how there's all these little things you learn along the way, that actually when you put them together you can create something that actually really, really hits home. I think it comes down to being able to, it's building that trust, and it's also framing your questions and structuring your interview in a way that you start maybe a bit softer, and then when you're kind of 45 minutes, 1 hour and a half into the interview, you then started to ask more challenging questions, and then very slowly you see their kind of perspective and character change. But, I mean, I think at least 3 of the interviews, so there's 4 main interviews in the film, I think 2 or 3 of them I was also crying with them, and I think that's also a testament to kind of how, these people tell you these horrendous stories, and it's hard not to get emotional yourself. But of course, that's the great thing, is that you can empathise with them, and that they also see that, and I think that helps, that they don't feel like you're just there with the camera and saying, go on then, say your stuff. You're actually listening to them and you're reacting to what they're saying. And also it's about contributors feeling like they're actually really valued in the process. It's not some kind of show where you go, right, tell us the most dramatic thing possible. Actually, the feedback we got from the contributors was them saying like how soft and respectful we were compared to a lot of, news crews or whoever wants to come and speak to them about their experience. And that's the thing about making a film in this way, where it's more of a documentary, is you're not looking for that one soundbite where they sound really dramatic and sad. You're actually looking for that story that's really dramatic and sad, but over a longer period of time, you've got more time to flesh it out. So I think that's a great thing about making films this way. It's not a TikTok reel, where you just go, tell us all the sad bits. There are many moments in the film that have a real shock value to them, that are really dramatic, that are really intense, but they're against lots of softer moments, so there are many dramatic scenes. We've got a lady whose home is demolished in the film, and actually it was quite hard to get permissions to film that, because obviously it's horrendous, it's really awful, and all the press was banned from filming it, but we got permission to film it. And I think, although it's a really dramatic scene in the film, and it was always going to be, there's no way to not make that dramatic, I think our approach over the 2 years has allowed us to gain that trust with the community, that they were like, you know what, this is a really hard thing for us, but we want you to film it because we want you to get the message out there and be part of that. So at the moment, I think the film still has there's still a lot that needs to be done. So we're hoping that it goes to festivals. We're hoping that we pick up some distribution for it. And a lot of those things will also take a long time. So I think, I'm not thinking about any other projects until that's done. However, I do have a few ideas up my sleeve. Unfortunately, I can't stop. Although it's kind of a process of like self-immolation. It's a curse. Although it's really challenging to make films, and it's really hard to do it on your own, I think in my heart, that's what I'm really drawn to. So there'll be another project, no doubt, and it'll probably be sooner than I realise. When I first started out, I remember being at college, and actually what I found really tricky was I knew what I wanted to do in my head. I just didn't have the technical ability to get there, and that was always really frustrating. But that's not changed, I know so much more than I did at college, but I still have this constant feeling that I just want it to be, and that's the thing, is that, when there's no budget and you are just working yourself, you are reliant on the skills you have. And I think that's kind of, moving forward, I think hopefully this opens up avenues for me to take on projects that maybe have a bit of backing and a bit of funding, and actually there's things that I can lean on expertise in a way that I can't right now.